host, one of your hosts, Eddy Webb, and with me as always are Dixie Cochran.
Did you think you were the only host, Eddy?
Yes, sometimes I get absorbed in my own things.
Rude.
And Matthew Dawkins.
And we are just figments of your imagination.
See, that makes so much more sense to me than the fact that you're both actual people.
Everyone that
Is
listens
one of
to
us
this,
the devil and one of us the angel on your shoulders? And if so, which is which? Answer wisely.
So I'm going to completely ignore that question and instead go right to the apologies. Last week we had some recording issues, and unfortunately due to the timing, we weren't able to re-record. So I did my best with the editing, but there were definitely some audio quality issues with our interview with the intro and outro of our interview with Phil Mercado. So for those of you who aren't following us on social media or haven't picked up some of the references we made, we've been trying to find new recording solutions for the past month or so, particularly since Gen Con. And that last week was just not a good, sustainable solution for us. So we're not doing that one anymore. We're going to keep finding new ways of doing it. Right now we're back to our default of all talking on Skype, but also recording separately. But speaking of media, that's actually going to be the topic for today. Last week we did kind of have a short little discussion about media that made us feel uncomfortable or that we kind of had to opt out of. And we realized there's a larger topic about talking about vampires in media and really just talking about media and pop culture in relation to the World of Darkness and the Chronicles of Darkness. So kind of just kick it off. Dixie, what kinds of media do you really love that kind of evokes the spirit of any of those games?
So I've always liked to play kind of like more, I don't know, a little bit of fun games, even though they are horror games. I like to be a little silly at the table, have a little bit of fun with that. Mm-hmm. So I've, of course, always been a fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I cannot, bring that up fast enough when anybody mentions vampire media. I'm currently on what is probably my 10th or 11th rewatch of the series.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. No, I've seen every episode at least 10 times.
So that's interesting because I watched only a few seasons of it, and then I just kind of fell out, and I've watched a little bit of Angel. So what really, what do you love about the series? What really kind of gets you going about it?
I think what I like about it is how they've always managed to balance the humor with the actual dark, scary stuff happening. Mm-hmm. Like, there are some really, really heavy, scary episodes, especially for network television. But there's always, that little Joss Whedon quips and funny bits and one-liners and whatever. And that's kind of how I like a lot of gaming to go. It's like, yeah, we're doing a serious thing, but we're also, supernatural creatures and having fun with it and whatever. I've definitely played games of Hunter that were modeled on Buffy. And, of course, I have played the Buffy RPG. It's been a long time, but I have played the official one.
Oh, wow.
It's fun. I love Buffy. But, yeah, so that's what I go off of. And then another book that I cannot talk enough about to people, I'm going to go ahead and get my faves out of the way up front, and then we can move on.
No, totally. It's great.
There's a book called War for the Oaks by Emma Bull.
Okay.
That, in my opinion, far too few people have heard of.
Mm-hmm.
It came out in the mid-'80s. My aunt gave me a copy when I was 12. I have probably read that book 20 times. And it is one of the better Changeling inspiration books that exists. It definitely reads as a period piece now because it's very much based in the music scene in Minneapolis at that time.
Okay.
So there's a lot of Prince references and Bowie references and all this stuff. The main character is in a band, but the main story is about a girl who gets pulled into a war between the Seelie and Unseelie courts because they have to have a mortal tied to the cause to make them able to kill each other.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this normal kind of rock and roll punk rock chick that gets pulled into this fairy war. And they have, pukas, and they have Gleistigs, and they have all these fantastic fairy characters that I've definitely seen in both Lost and Dreaming.
That sounds amazing.
It's one of my favorite books of all time. I recommend it to everybody. It's definitely, it's one I've read a million times. It's one of the first, kick-ass female heroines I ever, got to read. And also, it's a really awesome Changeling inspiration book, especially if you want to play, an 80s Changeling game. You can pretty much just lift that book wholesale, because the city itself is almost a character in the book.
Really?
So, yeah. Oh yeah.
That's awesome. How about you, Matthew? What kind of really favorite media do you have that makes you think of either of those lines?
Well, I never really got into Buffy as well as Dixie did, and although I will just add as an addendum, because you mentioned the RPG, I think that was an Eden Studios game, wasn't it? The Buffy RPG. They did both Buffy and Angel, and I've not played either of them, but I remember the Angel one getting rave reviews, and people still play it to this day, especially in the UK, and I've looked for it. It's not a game you can easily track down in print copy. So if you're listening to this and you own a copy, fancy donating it to a good cause, I can suggest someone probably other than me who deserves it. But anyway, my pop culture of choice, my, I guess, horror media, supernatural media, was the X-Files.
Oh yeah.
When I was, I guess, reaching that formative age where I really started wanting to digest stories about ghosts and vampires and aliens, of course, in the mid to late 90s, early noughties era. It was definitely, for me, X-Files, The Lone Gunman, which I still feel was robbed of a second season.
Yeah.
And going more into some sci-fi like Farscape. Those series, TV shows that had a real serial quality to them. I always preferred the, I guess, lengthy story arcs to Monster of the Week episodes.
Yeah.
And the X-Files, of course, became increasingly entrenched in that style of storyline, as did shows like Farscape. But they really got my imagination fired up for things like role-playing games, telling stories in the school playground, or just writing stories for fun. I used to love those kinds of things. But I guess I say that, and strangely, when I think back to something like the X-Files, which I haven't really rewatched since watching all the episodes as they were coming out, the episodes that really stand out in my memory are still the ones like Tombs and like Home, the one with the freaky, the freaky rural family.
Yeah. Home is still regarded as one of like the creepiest episodes of television ever.
And DPO and the list. There were lots of episodes around that sort of third, fourth season of the X-Files that were standalone and absolutely amazing, like all on their own.
Postmodern Prometheus is one that I always think of.
Yeah, well, God, we can just keep citing X-Files episodes now, and they probably will all be from the third and fourth season.
Well, and that's the thing, though, is that, like, I said, you're going to do that with Buffy, too. Like, there are certain episodes, like The Body and Passion and Innocence, which are mostly from second, third season, although The Body is from, I think, fifth, that, like, people will still hold up and be like, this is one of the best episodes of television. Right. Hush. The famous episode of Buffy where there were only 17 minutes of dialogue. It's a great episode. It still holds up. It's completely standalone. It does very little to advance the plot of season 4, but it's a great episode. And that's something that I think Buffy did as well as the X-Files. Was once they got past the first season and kind of found their feet, they got really good at having the overarching plot that was at least slightly advanced in every episode, even if the episode didn't really have much to do with it. And then they had episodes that were very much about that overarching plot, which I think is a format that both the X-Files and Buffy did really, really well.
Yeah, I remember reading an interview with the creator of the X-Files, and he talked about explicitly that there were what he called mythology episodes that progressed the plot, and then those that were against the mythology, specifically to kind of experiment with the formula and play with things. And I think you're both right. There was kind of a zeitgeist in the 90s of let's play with fiction, but also that was, I think, probably the start of the really heavily serialized media. Watching
you can see it.
You
can see it very strongly in a show like Star Trek, where Next Generation and the original series, but specifically Next Generation has a hell of a lot of standalone episodes that really don't play into one another. You know, they are real pick up and put down television. Dinner time telly that you can just switch off your mind and engage with the TV set. And then something like Deep Space Nine
Yep.
comes along, and it kind of displays an evolution of the medium, which I guess in next-gen terms comes with the Borg, but with DS9 comes about 2-3 seasons in, when all of a sudden every episode is must-see viewing, because you need to know what happens next to understand what's happening 2 or 3 episodes in the future.
Right.
Yep.
And it's an interesting thing, because that obviously plays quite strongly into the way we do our RPGs when we're running RPGs as GM storytellers and the like. It's of course always problematic if a player drops a session, but very few GMs ever really think, well, let's put in a Monster of the Week episode now,
Right.
where we can just keep the party occupied, but the absent player isn't missing a major story beat, and then when they come back in, we'll put them back on the main track.
Yeah.
That is an interesting point.
At the same time, that's the kind of Monster of the Week and overarching plot, mythology, whatever you want to call it. That's kind of how I think about most long role-playing campaigns. Is there's often the like big bad, as they always called it in Buffy.
Yeah.
But then you have to fight other things along the way or solve other problems along the way, while still occasionally encountering the big bad. And then, you know, when it gets to the end of a campaign, there is often a final showdown. And that's definitely kind of how I think of gaming. That's part of why we talk in terms of episodes and series and things when we talk about some of our games, especially in StoryPath. Is because that's how it works. Like there's a story arc, there are episodes, there are seasons on some level. You can do a whole series of games, you know, set in the same game or in the same world where there's a different big bad, but you're playing the same characters. I think role-playing games are very much informed by television and movie format in general, because like one shot is more like a movie or
Right.
a miniseries, and then a long one, you know, that you're playing every week is more like an episodic television show.
And it's actually interesting as a quick digression, but yeah, definitely role-playing games have been inspired by that, because the initial language for role-playing games was from its wargaming roots. That's why we have still have terms like campaign. It's more of a reference to a military campaign.
Right.
And then right around, you know, White Wolf, I think, was one of the main people who kind of moved it towards literary language. We use chronicle, we use story, as opposed to adventure and campaign. And then now, you're right. I mean, we've started adapting much more explicit cinematic and television language. We now have seasons, we have episodes, because it is kind of a natural fit. I mean, there really aren't very many kind of long-form serialized storytelling formats that aren't television shows. Comic books is about the only other one, really. One thing that's interesting to me, though, is that a lot of both your references were kind of very 90s era references, and mine are too, and I'm fascinated by that, because I was thinking about Forever Night, for example. I love Forever Night. And it's a terrible show. I mean, I'm not going to lie about it, but I mean, it's as 90s as you could possibly be. It's a vampire cop, and his sire gives him secret messages through the radio. I mean, it's about as 90s cliche as you can get, but weirdly, a lot of that stuff predates what we then come to term as the cliches. I mean, so if they were doing that kind of stuff first, that's where I think a lot of stuff comes from.
Yeah, so I think my first vampire media I ever saw was actually my mom was really into Dark Shadows when I was a kid.
Oh, Dark Shadows.
So I used to watch Dark Shadows when I was very young. Probably too young to really even get what's going on half the time, because it is a soap opera at its heart.
Yeah.
But I definitely used to watch Dark Shadows. And it was cool that you mentioned Farscape, Matthew, because my aunt is a huge Farscape fan, so she got me into that when it was on. I definitely used to watch that with her. And I used to watch X-Files. Like, we have some overlap, especially. I mean, it makes sense, because Matthew and I are the same age, so we probably hit the same, like, formative landmarks.
Right.
But yeah, I definitely used to be super into the X-Files. I wrote X-Files fanfiction when I was 11.
Wow.
It was really bad. But
I have some really bad Star Trek fan fiction. It's actually on the internet, so...
Oh, I'm gonna go find that.
It is 4 chapters of a novel I never finished 20 years ago, so...
Excellent.
But speaking of 90s era TV shows, I'm going to put a controversial opinion out there. I'm curious to see what you guys think of it, if you even have knowledge of it. Mm-hmm. I thought Kindred the Embraced was not nearly as bad as people say it is.
I've never actually gotten to see it.
Okay.
It's one of those things that was always kind of on my radar as something I'd like to watch at some point. Mm-hmm. Especially when it was coming out, because, you know, I was into White Wolf games at the time. So I was
Right.
like, oh, they're making a TV show. And then I forgot if I just didn't get a chance to watch it or what happened. I may have seen an episode at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I definitely did not see that one, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely didn't see it when it was new. I don't think it was even a broadcast over in the UK.
Probably not.
Watching it in retrospect, as I have done, it's honestly, it feels very similar to an awful lot of television released around that time.
Yes.
It's in fact, and I don't know why maybe you can identify why I make this connection so strongly. Kindred the Embraced seems to have the same sort of formula, acting style, shooting and scripting as old FMV video games for me. They always have those very sort of heavy tones of music over the background whenever someone is speaking. Everything is always lit horribly in shadow. Everything is incredibly close up on two people's faces, should never be that commonly close to each other when they're talking. Mm-hmm. But it's I know, you know, from having looked into it and worked on Vampire and all that there was definitely a budget there, and there was definitely a passion behind that project. But I have to disagree with you on the idea that it's not bad. I don't think it's awful. There's far worse, but I don't think it's good.
So,
and I'm glad I didn't see it when it first came out.
You mentioned the FMV stuff, and I think there's some relevance to that, because I think the stuff you're talking about is very much the primetime soap opera formula at that time period.
Right.
This is your Dallas, your Falcon Crests, that kind of stuff. I didn't really notice it myself until, by chance, it was not intended, I watched the DVDs of Kindred the Embraced, and soon afterwards I watched the original Twin Peaks.
Okay.
And there's a lot of similarities, but Twin Peaks is trying to make fun of that style. So they have, but to pastiche the style, you have to actually engage in it, and so they're doing it, and then it just becomes a little too awkward, a little too on the nose, a little too weird, because that's the whole point of Twin Peaks. But it was something that really was relevant to me, and I think it's relevant to this conversation too, is that Twin Peaks also weirdly inspires a lot of this stuff, because some people aren't quite getting the joke, and I admit I didn't get the joke the first time I watched it. It was like kind of watching it in context of a show that was contemporaneous that was trying to do something similar seriously. It's like, oh, this is, even the cinematography isn't on the gag. Even the cinematography is trying to kind of make fun of these elaborate plot twists, and, you know, bring the same actress back as her twin sister of the dead character and all that stuff, because it is all part of that. What was in the air around the soap opera formula at the time, people playing with the soap opera formula of the 90s.
Mm-hmm. And see, so that's one thing too, where I think we're gonna have a bit of an age gap, because I actually looked it up while you were talking. Kindred the Embraced premiered on my 11th birthday, which means I actually was not playing White Wolf games yet, because I didn't start playing Vampire the Masquerade till I was in 9th grade. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's probably why I missed it entirely.
That makes perfect sense.
But also, I really didn't watch a lot of soap operas in the 90s. I mean, I started watching, like, Buffy premiered in 97.
Right.
So I started watching that, and then I didn't really have too many shows I followed. I mean, I was still watching cartoons half the time, you know. I was still watching Sailor Moon and stuff. So it's
like,
yeah, I think Buffy and the X-Files were the only, you know, quote unquote grown up shows I was really hardcore watching, and then I would catch like Star Trek sometimes, things like that. But I spent most of my time reading when I was a kid, honestly.
And that's actually a good segue, because you also mentioned a book. I mean, there was also a big kind of boom, if I remember correctly, at least in the U.S., of that kind of the concept of young adult as we understand it now. Books that were a little too mature for kids' books, but they weren't quite there for adults. And a lot of those did have a horror veneer or a theme. There were Goosebumps. Matthew, you mentioned one on the recording that we lost about a UK equivalent, Fear something? Fear Point?
Yeah, the Point Horror books.
Point Horror.
Again, I don't know if they use that sort of subtitle over in America, but the idea behind the point horror books, and I would get a new point horror book out of the local library every single week. I'd read through it in the week and, get a new one, and there was certainly enough of them to do that.
And
they were...
Go ahead, sorry.
They were just, genuinely, and I don't say this in a derogatory way, they were trashy pulp fiction, pulp horror fiction, and they followed a fairly standard formula of a group of young friends in a location getting hunted down one by one, and quite often the killer would turn out to be one of the protagonists.
Oh yeah, always.
And you would have novels like The Babysitter through to Babysitter 7. You'd have The Fun House and The Attic and The Cellar, and through to the point that I think point horror got squeezed so dry for title ideas that you would have The Kitchen and The Waste Disposal, and it would just be focusing in on the drain pipe. But each one would have that same kind of plot of late teens to early 20s. Usually parents have gone away, or inexplicably they own their own properties in somewhere expensive like Seattle. I guess back then they probably could. And and eventually they will die. But I was reading those, and they very much informed the way I looked at horror, I guess. It was probably them that acted as a jumping off point for me to watch movies like Halloween and Friday the 13th. And I was reading them every single week, and obviously blind to the quality, I guess, literary quality of them.
I think that you get a little bit more discerning as you get older, usually, because I got super into horror really young, like 6 or 7. I started reading like every horror short story collection I get my hands on. And I'm sure going back and looking at them now, the stories aren't all that scary. But I like to terrify myself when I was a child. I definitely had all 3 of the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books, which still have the best artwork ever. And I had just a ton of other ones. I would read them aloud in the car to my mom and stuff. Mom also likes horror. But yeah, so I got into horror really young, and I was always aging out of stuff before I should. So I read all the Goosebumps books, and then I started reading the Fear Street books, which are the teen version of Goosebumps. Right. But I started reading those probably when I was 9 or 10. Which is probably too young. Even for the series, because I was a voracious reader as a child. My parents couldn't keep me in books. But even stuff like, the Sweet Valley High series, when they would have their super mystery or scary books, those were the ones I wanted to read over and over again. So by the time I was in probably 11 or 12 was when I was already doing Stephen King and stuff like that, and trying to read all the actual horror, reading all the Anne Rice and everything.
It's funny you should mention that, because I had a very similar experience. My mom was very into horror. She got me reading. I was reading Stephen King books about the same age, 11 and 12. And my mom, it's weird. My mom loves horror, but she hates gore. I suppose it's not weird, actually, now that I say it out loud.
That's not weird.
She would skip the gory parts, and when she remembered the book, she was like, hey, be aware. She'd give me functioning content warnings. These sections are going to cause this and this and this. Okay, cool. And I would just either skip them or say I skipped them and actually read them, because it's no, Mom, I'm totally skip that part. It's too scary. But it reminds me of a great quote from Neil Gaiman. He talked about Caroline, where he said that
Coraline. It's Coraline.
Coraline. Apologies.
God, Eddie.
I am literally the worst. Where he said that this book is probably too scary for adults, but it's about right for kids.
Probably.
Kids have a very different capacity for horror. And I do think that a lot of what we think of as horror and our tastes for that genre specifically are pretty heavily informed by how much and what kinds of horror and drama we read when we were younger.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I remember when I first started secondary school, so that's when you're 10 or 11 in the UK, so high school age, I guess.
middle school age.
And I remember when we had to take a book to our English literature class, and I took Stephen King's It. And that was the first Stephen King novel I read.
Oh my god.
Obviously, it's fairly sizable. And, we all had to read apart from the book we were reading at the time. And I don't remember reading something particularly disgusting about Patrick Hockstetter, although, of course, that sticks with you when you're a young man, the fridge full of flying leeches.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember making my way through that book, and it obviously educating me in a lot of ways. But yeah, horror literature, it's funny, it's only in retrospect, it's only in discussing like this that I realise how much of what I read when I was growing up was horror based.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I feel like we've reached a new point in our counselling group, so bit of self-applause here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
It is funny though, because like most of the media I consume now is probably not horror. I do still like to read occasional like suspense novels. I actually prefer like a psychological horror to like a gore.
Yes.
Gore doesn't necessarily bother me too much. It's just not what I gravitate toward. Whereas when I was 17 and trying to be a cool, edgy goth chick, I was buying anthologies that were actually titled things like Splatterpunk,
Right.
I definitely have moved away from that. And now I'm more likely to be reading things like, is it Gillian Flynn? Is that her name? That did Sharp Objects and all those. Like, those to me are more of the kind of horror I like now. Or the Leanne Moriarty books that are more about suspense and mystery, but also do have, horrific things happening. I think what I realized as I've gotten older is I'm much, much, much more terrified of actual humans doing terrible things.
Yes.
Because that happens, than I am about the supernatural stuff. So I've kind of moved way away from reading a lot of like vampire media and things like that. And I've gotten way more into, reading about fictional or real serial killers. Because I'm like, oh, they actually happened. This is actually chilling to me.
Well, it's for that reason I find myself at conventions, especially running games like Hunt of the Vigil, more than I run Vampire the Requiem or Promethean, because Hunter has its inbuilt antagonist of the slasher.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the Hunter sessions I ran at a convention very much had its slasher based on the tactics of noted serial killers such as Ted Bundy.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, so there was a pair of serial killers, a pair of slashers. One was, I guess, physically incapable of luring anyone because he was a hideous monstrosity, but his sister would do the I need your help to load this fridge into the back of this van or something like that, wearing a sling over her arm. And when a friendly young man would come to help her lurching brother would lean out of the van, pull him in, and off they would drive to do their nasty business to their poor victim. And I picked that up from Ted Bundy himself, which I don't know whether that's something I should be proud of, but I mean, rethink my life choices.
I'm pretty sure that's where they got it from for Buffalo Bill, Silence of the Lambs too.
Yeah.
Because that's how he gets the girl into his van.
Yeah. I mean, Silence of the Lamb, that's just a great kind of segue because I watched Silence of the Lamb when I was starting to get really heavily into Vampire the Masquerade specifically. Mm-hmm. And I distinctly remember walking away from that movie going, why can't all Malkavians be like that?
Right? And like that's the thing too about... So what's cool about Silence of the Lambs, and a lot of the Hannibal stuff actually, is that that's one of the few shows that I've seen that really mixes procedural with horror very well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of shows, like, either they are just procedurals, and of course parts of them are horrific because they're catching serial killers and stuff like that, but it's not horror-based. Right. And then most horror things don't have quite as much of the procedural bit going on. But I feel like a lot of the Hannibal Lecter media in general does a really good job of blending both of them, whether it's the books or the TV show or the movies.
It's something I don't know whether either of you have watched the series. There's a recent series called The Blacklist.
I was just thinking about Blacklist, yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think I've seen it.
So, basic premise is you have an incredibly dangerous criminal locked up, but he agrees to help the FBI track down all the various other nasty people in the world who are on his blacklist. So very much a Hannibal Lecter style thing, except is he bad, is he good? Now, The Blacklist is one of those shows that I can plumb for inspiration if I ever want to run a Conspiracy X game or a Hunt of the Vigil game, and I want a really nasty antagonist for a one-shot. Because each episode, almost to a T, every single episode has a different person from the list on it, and so they each have a title, which is the number of that person on the list and their name, which is a nice central conceit, but at the same time it doesn't satisfy a certain need I have, which is when I watch these things, and this is something that Silence of the Lambs is particularly good at with being a movie, and in fact something that it succeeds at as a rarity as a movie, because as you pointed out, movies are often one-shots in RPG terms.
Right.
The Blacklist will introduce a really interesting villain and will almost invariably kill that villain off by the end of the episode. So there's very little reason for me to become invested from one episode to the next, unless I'm interested in what's going on in the good guys' quarters. You know,
Right.
At the end of the series, they'll have a multi-episode arc where they'll have a particularly bad member of the Blacklist who they'll be going up against for 3 episodes on the trot. But for the rest of it, you can kind of dip in and out as and when you like. Hannibal Lecter, as a villain, obviously defies that, because as a kind of protagonist/antagonist, he will keep recurring.
Right.
And you can keep seeing increasing facets of him as a character, which at the TV series is fantastic at displaying. But it's certainly told me a lot about the kind of media I enjoy. I need the level of investment that comes with recurring characters, plots that expand over time, and not something I can just drop like a CSI, for instance. I need something more involved than that.
Did either of you ever see the TV show Profiler?
I think I saw a couple episodes of it.
It aired from like 96 to 99, although I didn't end up watching it until maybe, I don't know, 8-9 years ago. I had a neighbor that lent it to me because he found he knew that I liked shows with female leads, and he knew that I liked some procedurals and stuff. He's like, oh, this is really, really good. That show did a really, really good job of having the overarching scary stuff happening while doing standalone things. It's all based in Atlanta too, and since I've lived in Atlanta, that was
Really?
kind of cool to watch. Yeah, she's a member of the Violent Crimes Task Force in Atlanta, and she's a profiler, obviously. But also she has some history with a notorious serial killer that pops up over and over again. The cast is fantastic. It's a lot of people from before they were famous, which is interesting.
Yeah, those are always fun, yeah.
Yeah, so if nothing else, I recommend watching the first 3 seasons of that if you ever can get your hands on it. The last season, they replaced the lead character, and it wasn't as good.
Yeah.
But definitely the first 3 were really good. And that's a show that no one ever talks about, but that I thoroughly enjoyed. And definitely, there are a few actors on it who are on Nip Tuck later.
Oh.
I think it got compared after it came out to Chris Carter's Millennium a little bit.
Okay.
But Profiler was first, which is interesting. And it's definitely the earliest show I can find that kind of has all of those things that we're talking about. Like, it has some horror, it has some new monster of the week catching the bad guy, but also there's a really good overarching plot, So, recommended by Dixie.
Definitely. And actually, I think it's also a little bit of American serialized versus particularly British serialized, because a lot of that's like 6 episodes as opposed to try to stretch it out for 24.
That's what I love about British TV. They know when to stop. I love The Fall. I loved Broadchurch.
Yes, Broadchurch is so good.
Yeah, and I even watched the American remake that inexplicably still has David Tennant.
Really? I had no idea.
There's an American remake called Grace Point that also stars David Tennant in the same role.
Yes, it's really
And
funny.
I don't understand why they thought this was necessary. I thought Broadchurch was good as it was, but okay. But yeah, no, I love watching a lot of the British especially like crime dramas, because they will do something in 4 episodes and be like, no, that's all we need to tell the story. Or they'll do it in 12 episodes and you're like, yes, cool, thank you, we're done. Whereas I think for American audiences, they tend to try to stretch it out. Now, granted, with like Netflix series, that is changing a lot.
Yes, I agree.
And I think they're doing a lot better at being like, oh, we have a story to tell. We can do it in 8 episodes. Here you go. But yeah, for a long time, just because of the way that TV seasons worked, like you knew you were going to get 22 episodes of anything. And I can definitely tell, even going back and rewatching Buffy, I'm like, oh, that was a filler episode.
Right. And I think that the idea of uncomfortable protagonists, like we're talking about with the Hannibal Lecter stuff, I think that you can do that in a shorter show. Like there was one called Jekyll, which is kind of a modern Jekyll and Hyde rewrite.
Yeah.
And it's not bad, but I mean, the character that you're spending a lot of time with is uncomfortable, and it's by the time you go, I think I'm kind of done with this, the show ends. Okay, good. Another one that's relevant that I don't know a lot of people talk about is Ultraviolet. Not the movie, but the TV show.
Okay, I haven't seen the show, and I thought you were talking about that terrible movie for a second, and I was like, what are you doing, Eddy?
No. We can go, I'll get in the terrible vampire movies in a second. But there was actually a 6 episodes British show called Ultraviolet, and it's very much X-Files meets vampires.
Oh.
It's about a ambiguous British government agency that's hunting down a government experiment it's called Five. Which so it's written as the Roman numeral V, and near the end you realize they're hunting vampires. So it's very much how do you reframe this supernatural occurrence through modern scientific language. So it's very Hunter the Vigil, Hunter the Reckoning in that respect.
I like that.
And a lot of people don't know about it because it was kind of one and done thing. Because once you know the conceit, the series loses momentum. It's like, okay, they're hunting vampires. Well, then it's either just 11 seasons of hunting vampires supernatural, or you just kind of, okay, we've got it, we're done, we've finished that experience. So it's another kind of interesting way of ending on the twist. It could have been basically a 3-hour movie if they had gone that route.
I like that.
Yeah. And I was going to segue into something else, and I've completely lost my thread now.
No.
Well, in terms of series that vary in length, I see what you mean about the I guess punchier British series, which is only a few episodes, or 6 episodes usually, and we call them series as opposed to seasons.
Right.
But we'll forgive that. Ripper Street, I've seen, has been very popular with American audiences, and over here it's kind of sniffed at a little. It's not it doesn't seem to be as popular, and maybe it's the British accents and the Victorian setting and so on. It captures a lot of American fantasy, but that's a show that very much benefits from being, I think, around 6 episodes per season.
Right.
And also deals with the sort of gothic elements that we like to see in games like Promethean and Werewolf. While it's still thoroughly rooted in the mundane, there's elements of Ripper Street that, I guess, acts beyond the mundane. So you have people with inhuman twitches and who are making alchemical poisons and things like that, and you can just, with a little bit of a push, make them into the kinds of creatures that we want to see in games of Promethean created, as a good example, because a lot of people would, I guess, pitch a game of Promethean in that kind of era. And I guess when I was growing up and being exposed to these first, I guess, adult series, things like, there was a show called Edge of Darkness, and I will forgive you both if you've never seen Edge of Darkness.
Never heard of Edge of Darkness.
No, well, there's a movie version as well, which came out about 15 years later with, I think, Ray Winston and Mel Gibson, to very little fanfare. But the original TV show had Bob Peck, who was in Jurassic Park as Robert Muldoon,
right,
and Joe Don Baker, yeah, as his CIA contact, who was as bombastic as Joe Don Baker usually is. And it was all about about Bob Peck's character discovering a sort of nuclear conspiracy going on in the UK that ends up with his daughter getting killed and him becoming a bit of a loose cannon cop who's trying to get to the bottom of it, and his CIA contact who's going rogue. And it's an incredibly dark and morbid, driven series that does not end in a happy place at all. And is very much like symptomatic of that sort of late 80s, almost Cold War fatigue that shows like Threads and Edge of Darkness have. But I remember seeing it, and just by the fact that I can talk about it now in such detail tells me it stuck with me. And it's that the kind of broodiness, the attachment of family, of politics, of action, of conspiracy, all of these things being balled up together around very interesting protagonists is something that I love to see in RPGs as well. I love to see character sheets that enable for this kind of thing, where you can actually list off even in a simple way, you can just list off your contacts, list off your enemies, list off your aspirations, list off your fears, that kind of thing. That can really help when you're playing indie games like Monster Hearts, through to more convoluted games with 4-page character sheets at times, like some of our games. Our story path games especially benefit from that kind of build behind them.
Right, but I mean, it's interesting because we're talking about how the British series format can kind of help with that, but I also think sometimes the American format, if done well, can show you a very long, careful spiral of character. And I'm thinking particularly of Breaking Bad at this moment.
Oh God, yes.
It's
such a great show.
It's a great show, and part of it is because it's so long, and you become increasingly uncomfortable, and there's certain points where you're like, wait a minute, how did we get to here?
Yeah.
And it requires that long format to be able to have those moments that a shorter series, punchy series wouldn't necessarily get across.
But Breaking Bad also knew when to stop, and that's one thing I liked about it. They did their 5-season run, and they said, this is the end of the story. I think that there are other series that just keep going because people will keep giving them money. And Breaking Bad, certainly, if they had wanted to do 10 seasons, they would have let them. But I think that show would have suffered after the 5 seasons they had done, because it did get to a point where you were like, where else can they go with this?
Honestly, I think the stuff you're talking about, Walking Dead suffers from pretty badly.
Yeah, exactly. Because Walking Dead, I think, once again, it could have been a great 3 or 4 or 5 season show. And they could have ended, and they just keep stretching stuff out. I actually quit watching it a long time ago, so I can't speak to it. But from what I hear from other people, there are occasionally big punchy moments, but overall it suffers. And I think we can actually wrap that back to gaming. It's like sometimes your games do come to an actual conclusion. And it might be time to retire those characters or start a whole new thing with the same characters if you want to. But you get to a point where you have... Like, if you've defeated your enemies and you've, gotten so powerful, this, that, and the other, like, where do you go from there?
And I think you guys talked about that in an earlier episode when we talked about the design of, like, say, Promethean the Created with its milestone system.
Right, where there are games that have an actual end game. I would argue that a game like Vampire the Masquerade doesn't have an actual, specific ending.
Right.
But I think that you can get there. And another show that I really liked at first that I think suffered from going on a little bit too long was True Blood.
Oh, yeah.
I read all those books, which are much funnier and much more light mystery novels than the show. Yeah. Really? The Southern Vampire series by Charlaine Harris, very funny. It's all in first person from Sookie, so you get to really... be inside her head, and since she reads minds, that's kind of fun and interesting.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And I like, there's a little bit more about her romantic life that's actually funny and silly and cute, and, not just, it's not as angsty or dark as the show. It's got its moments, but it's a fun, light book series to read that I think my mom turned me on to. And then I heard they're making a series, and I was like, oh, this is a lot sexier than I anticipated. I didn't expect that. I thought they did a really great job. I'll still go back and rewatch the first 1 to 3rd season, maybe first to 3rd season. But the way that they introduced the fairy plotline is not at all how it was introduced in the books. In the books, it's kind of funny, actually, because this woman shows up and it's like, I'm your fairy godmother. I'm here to be fabulous, essentially. And it's really great. And then in the show, they made it this whole thing where they're, like, going to, essentially, Arcadia or whatever. And I'm like, this went off the rails. And then suddenly there's witches and Lafayette didn't die, and it's very confusing, so...
I love the idea, though, and this was, I think, only in the... you may have to correct me if it was in the Suki Stackhouse novels as well, where the idea of a vampire drinking Fey blood is one potential route of being able to day walk, as it were. I know it was in the TV series. Obviously, it drives a vampire mad as well over time.
No, that's in the books. Like, the entire reason that the vampires are so attracted to her is because she has fairy blood and this, that, and the other.
But it did. I agree. It certainly fell prey to becoming a show which was, which monster can we introduce in this series? You know, how insane can it become? And it goes built up and up and up to giddy excesses. And going back to The Walking Dead, and this is something I'd actually like to ask you, Eddie, regarding Dystopia Rising, which, you know, at time of recording, we're on the last day of the Kickstarter, but it will be on BackerKit, no doubt, within the next month or so.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people joked around the time Walking Dead reached, I guess, Season 3, and I was reading the comics as they were coming out as well, and people would joke at that time as well, that the series was fated for the characters to find a community, for that community to fall apart, for them to be on the road for a while, find another community, for that community to fall apart ad infinitum.
Yep.
And, you know, at first that was a joke, and now it does appear to be a reality of the TV show and the comics. The comics have actually jumped forward in time quite substantially, although I've stopped reading them now, so I can't tell you what's going on. In a game like Dystopia Rising, which is facing many of the same issues for the protagonists of a Walking Dead menace, how do you avoid that repetition of, I guess, for your character arc? Because presumably you're going to want to find somewhere that you can... Well, you might want to build up a community, build up security, but how do you avoid getting into the same loop of destruction that The Walking Dead manages to keep falling into?
Well, luckily, because the tabletop game derives from what started off as a live-action game, the concepts and needs of a live-action game really help out here. You don't want to keep dissolving and moving from things because... everyone meets the central location consistently on a regular basis. So there's a built-in incentive to keep that community going because this is the location that we're meeting at to play our game in. So some of that kind of gets inherited, but some of that also is, when I started working on the book initially, I took issue with the implied post-apocalyptic conceit of people are terrible, and if you put them into a space long enough, they'll eventually kill each other. Because history has proven that is not necessarily true. But in particular, a friend of mine, Steve Burnett, got me, recommended a book to me called A Paradise Built in Hell. And it's a nonfiction book, and it was studies of people in disaster areas. What they do when they're confronted with, their community wiped out by a hurricane, or, what happens in New Orleans, or what happened in Haiti. Studying all those kinds of hotspots of what happens after a natural disaster, or what happens after a governmental disaster. And consistently found that people are more inclined to help each other in those environments than turn against each other. Because a lot of the motivations that come from day-to-day life become very low in priority. I don't really care if I'm going to get power over you because we both need to eat.
Right.
And so communities build up from these disaster areas, and also they tracked and found that people stayed in touch more often after disaster events because there was this emotional bond that came from trying to survive those kinds of situations. People who were held in internment camps, or people who were held even in events like in the Nazi Germany camps, they would often stay in touch with each other long afterwards because of that shared horrific experience. So it's frustrating when I watch shows like The Walking Dead, because it's like that doesn't map with how I understand people work. It's a show that's driven by drama, which is my term for shows or media where characters make decisions not because it makes sense for the character, but because the plot requires them to make that decision.
Right.
And it's frustrating. Whereas to go all the way back to the beginning, one of the reasons I did like about Buffy, the few seasons I watched, is that Buffy made decisions that made sense for a teenage girl to make. And sometimes that made things more complicated. Sometimes it was just kind of I am aware of pop culture enough to know that this is a thing that vampires or werewolves generally do, so I'm just going to start with that, which is a kind of logical, of course, let's just try this first, because this is what all the media tells me works. And sometimes that causes other issues, but then the writing is reactive to the natural character reactions as opposed to programmatic characters who make dumb decisions because the horror plot requires to make dumb decisions at this point.
Right. That's one thing that I always liked about that show in particular, was that she always had her own agency, and that she was mostly always supported by the adults in her life about having that agency. Not as much in the first season with like her mom, the first couple seasons, but once her mom finds out that she's the Slayer and everything, her mom tries to be both protective and supportive. And because I am rewatching it with my roommates right now, there's a scene that I totally forgot about that I love, where she's Angel has turned evil because they slept together. That's like one of the big things. Because he had a moment of pure happiness. And she kind of looks at Giles and she goes, like, oh, it's all my fault. I'm the worst. I made the worst decisions. And Giles, who is the father figure in her life, I think almost every other show in 1997 or 98 would have slut-shamed her in that moment. And he actually said, do I think you acted rashly? Yes, but you loved him and it was your decision and it's not your fault and you're not a horrible person and I still respect you and all this stuff. And I was just like, Giles, like having the, father figure go like, yeah, this happened, but you couldn't have known. I totally still respect you. You're amazing. That's great. That was such a great moment for me, I think, as a 12-year-old watching this show. Because I started watching this show live, from when it aired, pretty much. Because I had seen the movie already at that point, which is a whole other thing.
That's much more explicitly a parody.
Yeah, I mean, when you've got Paul Rubens and Luke Perry in a movie about a girl named Buffy who fights vampires, it's a little silly. But yeah, so that to me, I don't know. It meant a lot to me growing up because it did teach me a lot, and the characters were always like 3 years older than me, so. But I also just was really into vampires for a long time, even I think pre-playing Masquerade. Like I had seen Lost Boys, I had seen The Hunger. I had seen an Interview with a Vampire, all the media.
And that actually just leads to the thread I forgot 20 minutes ago.
Cool.
And we have 10 minutes left, so kind of dig into the last topic, is specifically bad vampire films, or vampire films that we don't particularly like, or pop culturally are told they're terrible. Ultraviolet was what got me thinking about this, but also the Underworld movies. And let's talk about that elephant in that room there.
So I remember when they first came out, I went and saw the first one in theaters. I was definitely like into the idea because I am certain I was playing Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf and stuff when those came out. And my, 14, 15-year-old, whatever it was, self went like, that looks like a Vampire the Masquerade movie. I'm going to go watch that. Then I watched it and I was like, that was really kind of a Vampire the Masquerade movie.
Yep.
Loved the costuming. I actually have cosplayed as Celine, so.
Oh, nice. And that's the thing is that it's so actually talk about the elephant in the room. Yes, White Wolf did send legal claims to that movie. No, it was not just because they were trying to claim ownership of the concept of making vampires, which some websites hilariously in quotes made fun of. I wasn't around during that, but I've had lots of stories from people who were around, and basically there's when you're making a legal claim against someone, you have to do what's called points of similarity, and you have to list every single point of similarity that could possibly construe between your property and their property. And the story that White Wolf was alleging Underworld was derived from had 47 points of similarity in their brief.
Yeah.
So it wasn't. The first one was vampires have an society that is based on conspiracy and the like, and they use that in the war against werewolves. And people are saying, "Oh, White Wolf's taking ownership of that." It's like, no, they had to list all the points of similarity, and that was just one of the other 46. But you're absolutely right that I had so many friends at the time, myself included, who were involved with World of Darkness, going, "That looks really familiar." And outside of the points of similarity, it was also just more of a, hey, people think this is a cool idea, and that's interesting. You know, the idea that vampires and werewolves are not just mindless monsters, but are in fact different societies that have conflicts with each other, wasn't really a concept besides like Blade, one of the movie I could think of at the time, who really even dug into something like that.
Right. I don't know, I find that interesting. And two, I'm actually going to use that vampires versus werewolf thing to segue into my other favorite vampire movie, which is... it's one of those movies that people have either heard of it or seen it and they love it, or they've never heard of it. It's called What We Do in the Shadows.
I know. I haven't watched it yet.
That's fine. It is a mockumentary set in New Zealand. It's got Taika Waititi in it, who directed Thor Ragnarok, and Jermaine Clement from Flight of the Conchords. And they're the directors as well. And after I first watched that movie, I've probably seen that movie 10 or 12 times. I was like, oh, that's the most accurate representation of a vampire I've ever seen in my entire life. And it gets very silly at times. But there are werewolves as well in that movie, and they have conflict, but it's also humorous. I would recommend that to anybody, especially if you are a Vampire the Masquerade fan, and if you've done any LARPs or anything. It's a really funny way to kind of look at it, because it's about all these very different kinds of vampires sharing a flat. So you've got this super old, like, Nosferatu vampire who lives in the basement and doesn't really say much. And then you've got the, like, kind of 18th century, 19th century, like, fop character who, you know, very much cares about his appearance. You've got the one who's more of, like, a Dracula type from, like, the 14th century. And it's actually really easy if you play Vampire the Masquerade to kind of map clans onto all of them. I'm like, oh, that's the Toreador. Obviously the Nosferatu is the Nosferatu. This one's probably a Brujar gangrel. You know, it's a really, really fun movie. And I've actually taken a lot of inspiration from that, because it's really interesting watching how they set vampires in a small town where the population can only support a certain amount. And how do they keep quiet, and how do they find people to eat? And one of them actually has a ghoul who does work for him and stuff. So it's a fun movie. It's very, very silly. It's definitely a comedy, but it's also, you know, horror comedy.
That reminds me.
It also has that. It has the fantastic line when Vladislav is asked, "Why do you drink virgin
See,
blood?"
I try not to give that quote away, but the answer to why do we drink the blood of virgins?
Well, that's the answer to yes. I think of it like this: if you are going to eat a sandwich, you would just enjoy it more if you knew no one had fucked it.
One of my favorite lines in the whole movie.
Oh my god! And I was gonna move on from that, but honestly, that's a great way to end the episode. Matthew, on that wonderful note, how would people find you online to talk to you?
Well, if they still want to find me, I'm on YouTube as The Gentleman Gamer. I'm on the Onyx Path Forum as The Gentleman Gamer, and I'm on Twitter as Clack Click Bang.
Dixie?
I'm on most social media as Dixie Cyanide, Onyx Path Forums, Twitter, what have you, Instagram, all that.
And you can find me just about anywhere at eddyfate.com, EDYFATE, or at Pugsteady. Also, feel free to talk to us about the Pathcast on the Onyx Path Forums, on the Onyx Path Facebook group. Just add us on Twitter. Certainly, Jacob does all the time. That's the new running joke, is trying to find ways to work Jacob's name into this. But yeah, please.
He's our fourth host now.
Functionally, yeah. We should bring him on at some point.
We really should. He's fun.
But also, you know, where you find us online, please rate and review us. Leave comments. We love reading the comments. Some of them are a little confusing to us, but we're still able to read
Oh,
them.
Eddie, can I throw one thing out there? If people have either recommendations for really good ways to record podcasts that don't die all the
Yes.
time, let us know. And also, if people have requests for episodes, if there's like a person you want to hear from or a thing you want us to talk about, feel free to let us know on Twitter. Like, we are often kind of scrambling for like, what do we talk about? What do we talk about? You know, or like, who should we interview? Like, and it'd be nice to actually have people suggest things if they want to.
No, that's a really good point. And also, we're going to try to do some more recordings at conventions coming up. I'm not going to specify so we don't disturb people or, make people feel bad if they don't hear those episodes. But it seemed like a lot of people really liked the recordings we did at Gen Con, so we're going to try to do more of that as it makes sense and as we can. So, with all that said, thank you very much. And as always, many worlds, one Pathcast.